I'm the FanFic Critic. I read it, you listen. Today's episode is very special because it lands on All Hallows Eve. And today's fanfic is a Halloween fanfic from a pretty famous Halloween movie known as Hocus Pocus. Say what you will of that movie, but in my honest opinion, I loved it. It was my childhood. Yes, it had plot holes. Yes, it was kind of corny at times. But to me, it's Halloween. There's a special place in my heart for it. So, today's fanfic is called Begging by I Love Johnny. It's rated M. It's in English. It's Max D and Sarah S. It has 1 review, and it was published on the 9th of September, It was published on the 25th of September of this year. Let's get started. This is for Warriors Princess, who requested this wonderful pairing, warning not my best smut. Oh, how charming it is, smut. Please? Please, Max? Danny begged. No, Danny, I'm hanging out with my friends today. Max told his little sister. She had been begging him to take her back to the Sandersons' house for a week. Please, Max, please. She kept on pestering him, knowing he would give in. No, he said sternly, hoping she would leave him alone. Please? No. Please? No. Please? No. Please? No. Please? No. Please? No. Oh my God, how many more please no's do we have to go through? Let's get to the bottom. No, he yelled. Danny gasped lightly and her eyes filled with tears. She whimpered softly. Before he could say anything else, she had turned and run to her room. Danny, he called as he took off after her. He heard her door slam as he turned the corner towards her bedroom. He ran to the end of the hall and tugged on the doorknob. Locked. He leaned against the door and said, Danny, please let me in. Go away! She screamed from inside. He could hear the telltale tremble in her voice. Danny, please let me in, he said weakly, leaning his forehead against the door. She didn't answer. He sighed deeply. After a few moments of thought, he got an idea. He rushed to the kitchen and searched through the drawers. Finally, he found what he was looking for, a paperclip. He hurried back to Danny's room, unbending the paperclip as he went. He reached for her door and quietly poked the end of the paperclip into the hole in the knob. He jiggled it around a little before he heard the lock click. He silently turned the knob and stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Danny laid on her bed, her back facing the door, shuddering with sobs. A pang of guilt coursed through Max. He hated seeing his sister like this, especially when he himself had caused it. Oh, and by the way, they forgot to capitalize the H and he, so please fix that if you're watching this review, that is. Never mind. He sat softly on the bed and said, Danny. She didn't answer. In fact, her sobs intensified when she heard his voice. Danny, I'm sorry. I didn't mean that. He placed a hand on her arm. Danny, please look at me. When she didn't turn, he gripped her under the arms and easily lifted her, turned her around to sit next to him. She still refused to look at him. He wrapped his arms around her and pulled her to him, hugging her tightly. Finally, she gave in and wrapped her little arms around his torso. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, he whispered into her blonde hair. Funny, I thought she was a redhead. He placed a kiss on the top of her head and said, I'll take care of you. I will. She sniffed as she looked up at him, tears still in her eyes. You will? Max just nodded. She grinned and hugged him closer to her. Let's go call the guys, he said, laughter evident in his voice. Danny giggled and nodded. Max stood up and started to walk out. Max? Her voice rang out behind him. He turned around to see her holding her arms above her head. Carry me? Max rolled his eyes playfully and ran back to his little sister, scooping her up in his arms and throwing her into the air. She giggled uncontrollably as she landed back in his arms. He strode out of the room, Danny with her arms around his neck and her head on his shoulder. He walked back to the kitchen and set her down on the counter, next to the wall phone. She watched him intently as he dialed a number and held the phone to his ear. Hey man, he started. Actually, I need to talk to you. I can't come today. Because I'm taking Danny to the Sandersons' house. No, you cannot come. He stole a glance at Danny, who giggled. Okay, I'll see you tomorrow. He finished and hung up the phone. Are you ready? He said in a mock serious tone. I am ready, she said, giggling. Max grinned and scooped her back up in his arms, throwing her playfully over her shoulder. I guess Max turned into Max the Mista, and advancing out the door. The walk to the Sandersons' house was a short one. They arrived in front of the mysterious house in less than 10 minutes. He put Danny on the ground and reached for her hand. They joined hands and slowly walked forward, Max in front. He pushed the door open and was greeted by a cold wind from inside. Danny shivered as she stepped inside. They could see their breath in front of them. The house was seemingly empty. Silence hung in the air, broken only by the sound of Max and Danny's breathing. Danny's hand slipped from his, and she walked over to what looked like to be the kitchen. Max, knowing where she was, decided to do some exploring himself. He wandered down a hallway, looking at old photos as he went along. Suddenly he was yanked into a bedroom and pinned against the wall. A hand was clapped over his mouth, stifling his scream. He wouldn't even have thought of screaming when he saw who had captured him. Sarah Sanderson stood before him, clad in nothing but a black lace bra and panties. His pants immediately felt tighter. Hello, Max, she purred. Hello, Sarah, he said with as much courage as he could muster, you mean? She smirked at his confidence. She suddenly glanced down and noticed his erection, which was extremely evident through the thin material of his pants. Getting a little excited, I see, she said, her voice husky. Just the sound of it sent shivers up Max's spine. Sweat beaded on his forehead as she pushed him closer to the wall, pressing her body against his. Silently, she slipped a hand into his sweatpants and grabbed his now stiff cock. He groaned loudly. She grinned and squeezed lightly. He grew even harder under her hand. Before he knew what he was doing, he had grabbed her face in his hands and kissed her, forcing his tongue between her lips. He felt her smile against his lips. She broke away and whispered, Danny. Shit. Max had forgotten about Danny. Stay here, he commanded before striding out of the room and back into the living room. He practically ran into the kitchen. He saw his sister looking into a sketchy-looking jar of something red. He pulled her away and threw her over his shoulder. Max! Max, what are you doing? She whined. He didn't answer. He just carried her out of the house and towards the forest, putting her down when he reached the edge. Stay here, Danny, he said, his eyes darkened with lust. But, she started. Stay here, he commanded, striding back toward the house. Danny sighed and sat down against a burst into the house. What? Danny sighed and sat down against a burst into the house and sprinted into the bedroom. I think you forgot to complete the sentence involving Danny and just had the sentence involving Max kind of like merge with it. So if you're watching this, could you please fix that? Thank you. Let's continue. He almost fainted at the sight before him. On the bed lay Sarah, naked and sweating, touching herself, awaiting his return. He growled and pounced on her, straddling her stomach, his erection pressed into her stomach, causing him to groan in pleasure. She grinned up at him as he removed his jacket and pulled off his shirt. He leaned down and kissed her again, massaging her breasts. She giggled and rolled over so she was on top of him. Today is your day to be submissive, little boy, she purred in his ear. She kissed his neck, moving down toward his chest. He groaned as her tongue circled his nipple, teasing him. She nipped at his nipple, extracting a sharp intake of breath from the teenager. She swirled her tongue around it, making Max arch his back into her mouth. She smiled in triumph and moved lower, kissing the toned abs as she went. Finally, she faced a rather large bulge in his sweatpants. After grinning up at him, she ripped off his pants and boxers in one motion, freeing his throbbing member. She unconsciously licked her lips as she looked at his cock. She experimentally licked the tip, looking up for his reaction. He let out a guttural groan and bucked his hips, his eyes closing of their own accord. She ran her tongue up the underside of his shaft, loving how he was already trembling beneath her. With no warning, she took him into her mouth, sucking brutally. Max cried out and tangled his hands in her hair, attempting to push her farther down. She slowly pushed her head down and pulled back up, lightly brushing her teeth over him. I wonder if he's minty fresh. Forgive me for saying that. The mix of pleasure and pain almost killed him. He was already dangerously close to his climax. She tightly gripped the base of his cock and began to bob her head, her yellow hair flying back and forth. Max gripped the bed sheets so tightly his knuckles turned white. With one last squeeze, he was pushed over the edge. He came into her mouth, groaning intelligible words. So he was saying intelligent words as she was doing this to him? Okay, whatever. She diligently swallowed it all and sat up. She crouched over his length, her dripping slit less than an inch from his cock. She watched him come down from his high, his chest heaving as he gasped for breath. As soon as his mind unclouded, he looked at her, she slammed herself down, impaling herself on his member. So even though he ejaculated, he magically still has an erection? Okay. He practically screamed, gripping the sheets so hard that they actually tore. She threw her head back and moaned softly. She waited a minute, letting herself get accustomed to the feel of him inside of her. But she soon started moving, rising up slowly and pushing back down quickly, riding him. As Max got used to the feeling of wet warmth wrapped around his cock like a sleeve, he let go of the sheets, resting his hands on her lips. On her hips, I mean. He started moving his hands with her, pushing her farther down. Soon Sarah reached her own climax, her walls clenching relentlessly onto Max's member. The sound of her moans and the feel of her squeezing around him launched into another orgasm. His nails dug into her hips, drawing blood, but neither of them cared. They were too lost in their releases. When they both finished, Sarah collapsed onto the bed next to Max. He turned to face her, still gasping for breath. She leaned in and kissed him softly. When she broke away, she smiled softly and said, "Danny's waiting." Max groaned. Again, he had forgotten about his little sister. He kissed her one more time before grudgingly getting up and getting dressed. With one last glance toward the blonde, he walked out the door and through the house. Danny was still against the same tree he had left her at. Okay, so I guess she was sitting against a tree before. What took you so long? Well, it should say what took you so long, but it actually says what took so long. Oh, I guess it could say what took so long. Sorry, that was a mess up on my part. She exclaimed as he approached, standing up. "Oh, nothing," he said distantly. Then he picked her up and said, "Shall we go home?" Author's note. I know, misleading title, evil author, bwahaha. Anyway, the first person to find the Sweeney Todd reference gets a cookie. She had yellow hair. Danny's waiting could be a reference to Sweeney's waiting. I want you, bleeders. Yeah, there's several Sweeney Todd references. Oh, and did I mention that this author loves to write Sweeney Todd fanfics? Okay, for this story, if you put aside the fact that it pretty much pissed and shit all over my childhood, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. At least it didn't pair Max and Danny together, because that would just be gross. And at least it didn't pair Danny and Binks together, because that would be even worse, and that would also be bestiality. And even though Max is a teenager in this, I mean, I don't know. I mean, with Sarah Sanderson, she came across as being young in the movie. I mean, well, either way, even if she looks young, she's still hundreds and hundreds of years old, but I guess it wasn't too bad of a fanfic. It was a decent slash, or I shouldn't say slash, it was a decent romance. It was kind of cute. And at least I didn't have, Danny involved or anything like that, thank God. It was quite tame, and I was expecting something much worse. The author needs to fix up their grammar, and, well, yeah, pretty much just their grammar, because they had a couple little F-ups in there. But other than that, it wasn't that bad of a fanfic. In fact, it was kind of disappointing for a Halloween fanfic. I was expecting murder. I was expecting ghouls and goblins. I mean, yes, you got to see one of the Sanderson sisters, but it wasn't like she was doing any magic. All she was doing was giving the guy a blowjob. Ugh. And with these bad fanfics, I was really expecting, you know, like slash or something, or like incest, or just imagine if there was a fanfic out there that slashed, or, you know, like slashed Max and Binks together, but having Binks be the cat. So not only would that be slash, that would be bestiality. Thankfully, I don't think there is a fanfic like that, because this Hocus Pocus section only has like 25 fanfics, but still, that would just be disgusting. Or even worse, what if they put Max and Winifred together? Just the sight of that, just the mere thought of it would make me want to slit my throat. I would slit my throat right now if they did something like that.
When will you ever learn?
Susan?
Susan?
Are you alright?
You just startled me, that's all.
You seemed rather startled before you even saw me.
Well, the dream I had kind of startled me as well.
A dream? What was it, like a nightmare or something?
It was nothing. It was just a dream.
Look, if it was something serious, you really should...
It wasn't anything important. Besides, my memories of it are kind of fuzzy now.
I want to apologize for what I did earlier. I thought you were going to slit your throat.
I understand.
When I was hearing ruckus in your room, and when I opened the door and saw you with the straight blade open in your hand, I just automatically assumed that you had read a bad fanfic and that you were going to kill yourself, and I overreacted, and that's why I shot you. And I just wanted to say I was sorry for doing that.
It's okay. I wish to be left alone.
Look, if you're mad, I understand.
Please, Susan, just go.
All right, then. I'll leave you alone.